Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Punattu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavati Tamastu Ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hello. So we left off last week on verse 66, a very famous verse, which states to relinquish all dharmas. And what it's talking about is when we're saying relinquish all dharmas as an S, as it were, meaning your vasanas. And when we break that down, in fact, you can't relinquish the self because it's all pervading in the context that we're talking about. That's the value system. So the only other things to relinquish are your perceptions, emotions, thoughts, to refine them when you say relinquish. Relinquish, when we say relinquish renunciation, remember we always mean that growth to displace the lower value, the less pervasive for the more pervasive. So in the context, we're saying to relinquish vasanas is refine your desires, refine your vasanas so that they are no longer your focus, as it were. So it doesn't matter who you are, where you're coming from, what stage you're at. It's like that movement from wherever you're at, you're stepping it up. In the Ramayana, we have examples of villains who became sages. So in the case of the Ramayana, Valmiki was a highway dacoit who became a author of Ramayana, of that knowledge. So it's a refinement. So be you a pickpocket or a Robin Hood, in a negative or a positive, it really doesn't matter where you're at. It matters what you actually refine yourself to be. So relinquishing all dharmas. So the focus is on that essential self. So you're dropping and dissolving your ego, essentially. You're insulating yourself from the goings on in the world. If you just stand back for a moment, be objective to whatever you're doing. If you actually even go from one country to another, you forget what's happening in the country that you were just once in. The picture changes. It's like changing the channel on a TV or whatever we do now. So we get consumed by so many perceptions, emotions, thoughts, which are not actually relevant to us. So it's insulating yourself from all that you don't need to get involved in. It's not saying you're not aware of it. It's just that you insulate yourself. If you can do that in your actions, in your emotions, you focus it in terms of right action or devotion or jnana, making that distinction between what's more real than the other, or what's the distinction of real and unreal, then you actually make yourself a beacon for others. And you alleviate yourself from that worry and anxiety. So in the last verse, Sarva dharma parityaja Mamekam saranam rajat, relinquishing all dharmas, take refuge in me, I will liberate you from all sins, grieve not. So he says grieve not as just a recap. I will liberate you. Nobody's going to do anything for us. We have to do whatever we want to do in our own evolution for ourselves, for our own karma, bhakti, jnana, yoga. Don't worry, he says. So as long as we're not focused on the result of our actions, and just the success is in the action, not the result. And everybody makes the mistake that it's in the product rather than how you've pursued the product. Because everybody's in that rajasic rush to get the product, they miss it. Before they've got it, they're on to the next. Very rarely do you enjoy it, and when you enjoy it, you have fear of losing it. So it's a mindset. So this is the end of the chapter, and this just recapped it. If there's any questions on it, we can take it. It's a very well-known, famous verse, relinquish all dharmas. So just want to note for yourself, whatever. I don't know if there's any question. We will move to the next. Let's go. 67.
Idam te nadapaskaya na bhaktaya kadaschana na cha ashu shrushave vachyam na cha mam yobhya shuyati.
Sam, if you could read the verse.
67. This is not to be spoken by you to one devoid of austerity, not devoted, does not render service, or speaks ill of me.
So he's actually, in this little word idam, he's summarizing all of what's been said in the last verse, in actual fact, the Bhagavad Gita as a whole. So the whole message is given in this little word idam. So the knowledge is not to be given to one who cavils or speaks ill of the knowledge. It's not that it's not to be given, it's just that the person's not going to be able to take it anyway. So why splash it in front of somebody who doesn't want it? Sometimes you find when you're talking to people, I've certainly come across this lots, and now I've learnt in time to shut up. It's better to shut up, keep your own opinions, or you're thinking to yourself. Only when somebody's asking, can you offer it? When one's involved in their own field of activity, there's no use. You have a good idea. There's no use showing it on somebody else. It's not your business to. So, especially if the comeback is, I mean, I remember, I still get it from some people. You know, what do you do doing Vedanta? Why do you do Vedanta? They're almost telling you, like, haven't you got anything better to do? I don't really want to say what I'd like to say to them, because that's really my business within me. But it's innocent. Their preoccupations is something else, and they feel that your preoccupation is not with their preoccupation. It's as simple as that. So you don't have to. If it's you get that cavilling with that knowledge, you don't have to go there. Carry on with what you're supposed to be doing. So one doesn't address such persons. You're wasting your time and energy. So one who's devoid of austerity, it's all the things that one ought to have here, and if not, then don't take this up. Devoid of austerity, not capable of doing tapas. Tapas, what's tapas? What we've used this word. What do we mean? Tapas. Not the Spanish Spanish meals, small meals. Tapas and tapas. What's tapas? What do we mean by tapas? So one who's devoid of austerity, a different word for austerity, tapas, in the way we're using it here. Anybody? What do we feel? Tim?
It's a little bit like shudder. It's difficult to find an equivalent in English, but rather like shudder, tapas is a constant attack, pressure on trying to find out the truth.
Just discipline. No truth. Thanks.
And almost, I mean, yeah, I've always struggled to find a word for this, but maybe even like sacrifice. So, you know, you have people who, I don't know, like have their hand up for like 10 years or something, and they're doing that for tapas. So I don't know, like sacrifice.
Pseudo tapas.
Yeah.
Why would you want to stick your hand up for 10 years? It's all going on in your head still. I mean, it's questionable. We can argue, we can discuss this one. Like, look, if I'm here in the class, every class with my hand up, well, maybe I gain some muscles. I mean,
yeah, some people, I don't know.
What tapas is that? We got to think about that.
I'm
not saying yes, I'm not saying no, I was questioning it.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say.
But you've brought up a good point, because that's what people think tapas is: standing on one leg, hand in the air, sitting on a bed of nails. That sort of penance, kind of physical abuse to their body so that they've gained. It doesn't make sense. Your thoughts are in your head. Are you going to say, if you put your hand down, that you've controlled your thoughts, or you're not in control of your thoughts? That's a physical thing, and the thoughts are more pervasive than your physical action. So yeah, you may gain something from it, but in terms of spiritual evolution, you have to think about it. I would question that. You can decide upon yourself what you think about it, each one. It's talking about a different type of tapas than, you're definitely channelizing your energies for some purpose, but is that spiritual? I'd question. I don't know. I'm just questioning. So what is tapas? Anything more?
It's the practicing of vivekam and vairagyam. So we need to constantly, it's more an internal practice. It's of the mind. It's learning to understand everything for what it is, and to give each one the value it really has, as in no value in things in the world. So it's the ability to discriminate and understand and not be emotionally attached, not be bonded with it. It's that growing of that mind, developing the intellect. That is the Vedanta tapas that we've been discussing. The one which Isha was talking about, there were times in Hindu mythology where people did do, like Ravana himself did a long penance, and he did a long tapas, and he got the boons from the gods. from the celestial gods, where it was a physical and a mental tapas. What people do today is very different. We don't know what their aims are, like, each one does it, but it's basically withdrawing yourself from all the sense organs and focusing on something that you believe is of higher value.
Okay, thanks with you. Excuse me. So these are just some things to think on, tapas. Important tapas in terms of spiritual growth, channelizing your energies towards a higher purpose. Discipline, standardizing life.
I mean, we can practice tapas even in the work we do, isn't it? When we're doing a project, so to speak, we give undivided attention to the work and the quality of the work. So that's at a terrestrial level, at a material level. But that comes with habit of focusing on what we are doing, and then slowly but surely graduate on a higher level.
So tapas at different levels. A discipline with your material, your physical, your emotions, or your speech, and to shut up and when to talk. What you allow yourself to hear or not to hear, where you get distracted, where you leave it alone. What do you reflect upon? What do you think? What are the values you're taking in? So the tapas is the discipline and channelizing that towards something bigger. So those devoid of austerity tapas, you don't need to get into them. To embark on this sort of knowledge takes a discipline. If you really want to evolve in it, it takes your own discipline, your own self-study, your own reflection, your own thinking. These are sort of like guides to help you do that for yourself. So it takes discipline. So to distract yourself with all and sundry, you don't need to get involved in it if you can understand it. So this is not spoken. This is not to be spoken by you to one devoid of austerity. It's actually, you can say outside, you don't go sort of flaunting it. Or the other way around it, of looking at this verse is, these are the things that you need to have to evolve. These are the traits. So it says here, not devoted. So only if you've got that devotion, you're going to grow with yourself. Devoted to what? To either somebody who's got a bigger intellect than you, a guide, a book, something within you, whatever you choose it to be, to have that perception, that identification with the whole, devotion. So also, who renders no service, the opposite of service. Somebody doesn't have a charitable disposition. It's not so much the amount of charity they will do, but it's the attitude that they keep. They don't render service ever. It's a taker constantly. You don't need to go offering your services to people who are greedy or selfish or self-centered. You offer for that person who genuinely wants to know. Unfortunately, in this society, you have to offer everywhere and it gets sifted through. If we sift it through, we'll know nobody will be here. But it's like to be a little bit selective and clear about what you're doing. Never mind, you just keep clear with yourself of what you need to do. So not to be spoken to one who's devoid of Shraddha tapas. So make sure you have the Shraddha tapas. One who's not devoted, make sure you're devoted. One who renders no service, make sure you're getting onto your own karma for your own growth. Nobody else's business, really. So these are the qualifications. There's no point wasting your time where it's not going to run smoothly for you. So no teacher or master or anybody needs your devotion as an individual, but there's a tradition in this sort of way of teaching, is that you have a devotion to your guru, whoever it is. And the reason is it's just a sound post, it's just a person that you can ask questions to and clarify, and they'll look at your best interest. That service is so that you can outlet. It's not for them to take advantage of. So that's the truest of gurus. So that way you grow. So having that sacrificial value within yourself means not being selfish, essentially. So who amongst us can be sacrificial? So one who is devoid of respect for the knowledge, who doesn't surrender to something higher, who's devoid of discipline. There's no use, sort of like, as Christ put it, don't cast pearls before swines. Meaning, a person just can't take it. Why are you going there? Go to where it's to be put forward and check yourself first. Let's read it. With it. Sam, you're on mute.
Sorry.
That's okay.
In this topic covering verses 67 to 73, the Lord speaks of the values of his great sermon, and that the knowledge should be handed down to posterity. He who teaches or even learns this supreme knowledge shall attain liberation. Having given out his sermon, Krishna asks Arjuna if it has helped him wipe out his ignorance. Arjuna reverentially affirms that his delusion is cleared, his understanding restored, and he will follow the valuable advice. The verse specifies the stern qualities necessary for a seeker to gain the sacred knowledge. The Lord advises Arjuna never to impart this knowledge to those who lack austerity, devotion, and service, or cavil against him. One who cavils, slights the Lord or his message, lacks faith. Faith is essential for one to launch on the spiritual journey. Faith in the supreme reality must be supported by tapa, austerity. Tapa is a seeker's determined and consistent effort to free himself from his terrestrial entanglement and pursue the transcendental reality. His subtle intellect maintains this pursuit.
So we were just talking about tapas. The one thing to note in what I'm saying here is it's your subtle intellect. When we call it tapas, is focused on something universal. So sticking your hand up in the air isn't going to help. If you get what I mean. It's a very distinction between what's in this world and what's out of this world. Physical yoga won't help you gain the self, but it will help your body be fit, which enables you to not be disturbed by your body to then be able to think. So it's like the understanding of why people do what they do. People do things in compulsion because they can't think. Their mind's everywhere. Or in things to like penances because they can't actually concentrate on the higher. So they, punish themselves indirectly. But the reality is, a thinker will not look at it that way. Why should you punish yourself by your own activity? You don't need extra punishment. So to get off that worry and anxiety, to get onto the journey. Tapaha. It's using your subtle intellect, not that gross intellect, that worldly aspect. It's using that ability to project something beyond. Tapaha, channelize into that. Let's read the last part.
The journey to truth must also be supported with devotion and service. The mind must maintain a feeling of devotion to the Supreme. The body must serve the ideal set by the intellect. A seeker's personality has to be thus integrated to gain spiritual unfoldment. The above qualifications are not meant to deter aspirants from the spiritual path. They are specified to enable the seeker to recognize the essential requirements for pursuing it, so as to tune his personality better for reaching the ultimate abode of peace and bliss.
So when we read these, it's to examine in your own time what is sacrifice, service, sacrifice, what is tapas, what is having a charitable disposition, really about what is that devotion. Because there's so many superstitions, so many mechanical rituals that people do in the name of evolution, so many religious rituals that people do blindly, rather than it being punctuation, but just doing, which is not spiritual evolution. So it's like carefully analyze what you are doing yourself. You can't help the world doing what they want to do, but you can help yourself and be that beacon of light. Let's go to the next.
Yaidam paramam guhyam mabhaktesu abhidasyati bhaktim mai param krutva mameva ishyatya samshayah.
Isha, if you could read the verse.
Verse 68. He who shall teach the supreme secret to my devotees, having shown the greatest devotion to me alone, shall doubtless come to me.
So those who should teach this supreme secret. The secret, because people don't know the basic values of what this is teaching in fact. People aren't aware of it. That's sort of a dharma praditya. They're not aware of it. So anybody putting forward this knowledge without any motive, with that devotion that they show to that knowledge, that subject, their guru is in the tradition. Doubtless, asamshaya, so Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, asamshaya will gain the highest knowledge of the self. So when you study, when we gain this knowledge, we learn the next thing, the hierarchy of how you gain it and absorb it. One needs to reflect on the knowledge. It's really important just not to shove yourself with lots and lots of knowledge. The next step of taking in knowledge is reflection in your earlier hours. And when you reflect on it, you might speak this knowledge. Speaking isn't necessarily always through your words, what you say. It can be in silence, it can be in different expressions. It can be through music, it could be through art, it could be through the way you act in your behavior. Ramana Maharishi did it through silence, this realized person. And it's hard to imagine that. But so whatever you may be about, that's where it will come out. But you need to absorb and digest that knowledge thoroughly, so it's the wisdom. So this is the hierarchy. So even at this stage, we might be speaking rubbish. It's a process. Even in our discussions, we might have discussions of nonsense. It's a process of stretching your intellect and digesting that knowledge. So it really doesn't matter. It's a process of your growth. And slowly that knowledge is offered out. So your job as a sadhak, as well as taking in knowledge, if you've really taken it in properly, it will be given out. You teach it. So the highest service is Swadhyaya Yajna. The highest offering, the highest giving, Swadhyaya Yajna. When you examine and evolve yourself, everybody else evolves. That's the idea. Tim.
So he's not asking Arjuna to be a teacher in the traditional sense. He's asking Arjuna to manifest his understanding.
Yes, but teacher could be also like we have now. But it's actually, what it means is, how do you pass on that knowledge? The old tradition is Guru Shishya Parampara, Guru, where you as have gained it, so you pass it on. You don't keep it to yourself. How you pass it on is exactly what you're saying. It could be in the expression which you will naturally be that example, that beacon of light from whatever it is that you do. So it gets passed on. So as the knowledge becomes clearer and clearer and becomes that wisdom, you in yourself become that beacon of light. So he's always going on about having the devotion to a higher till you become it in fact. So he's now giving a little bit of intellection and sense. Let's read this.
The spiritual paths of bhakti, devotion, karma, action, and jnana, knowledge, are the traditional disciplines for a seeker to attain enlightenment. Here, in the concluding portion of his sermon, Krishna declares the imparting of spiritual knowledge itself to be the highest of bhakti, karma, and jnana. The knowledge of Supreme is said to be a great secret. The knowledge of Supreme is said to be a great secret, since it is not known. Rare indeed is one who puts in efforts to learn and teach that knowledge. This verse declares him as having the greatest devotion. Devotion is generally understood as mental
Obeisance.
what's this word? obeisance to God. Obeisance to God. Herein the Lord presents a striking concept, equating the preaching of this knowledge to supreme devotion, and that devotion shall doubtless take a seeker to enlightenment.
Mhm. So, in actual fact, your own study and reflection, you devote to the higher, that encourages you to go further. That slowly digests in you. When you give it out, you've also got to put in effort to make sure that you are giving it to the best of your ability. So you've got to also make sure that you've digested, you've reflected. As you go along it, just taking in knowledge. Then when you write it, and then when you speak it, perhaps, if that's the expression, you have to be relatively clear of what you're saying. And even if you're not, and you're speaking rubbish and you keep going on, sooner or later it'll get clarified and become so. So sometimes we might be speaking rubbish. Then it's up to you to question it. But that's the idea. So the greatest of service is Swadhyaya Yajna, and then you naturally offer it out in that tradition. When you're offering, it's always as a yajna. There's always that devotion. Let's go.
न च तस्मान् मनुष्येषु कश्चिन्मे प्रियकृत्तमा भविता न च मे तस्मात् अन्यप्रियतरो भुवि.
Tim, if you could read the verse.
Verse 69. There is none among men who does dearer service to me than he, nor shall there be another in the world dearer to me than he.
So when he's talking about he, meaning that person who offers, teaches, that service that offers. So when you gain it, you learn to pass it on. That's what it's talking about. And the thing to do is you've got to put yourself in a position, before you pass it on, you've just got to keep filling yourself. It will naturally spill out. You can't pass on what you've not got. There's nothing in your pockets. You can't empty them out and give something. So you've got to just keep on. Your job is to keep on taking knowledge, reflecting it, making it your own, grow with it until, and in discussion, we have discussions sometimes, that helps us understand. That's also a way of learning. So the greatest of service is one who imparts this knowledge. It gives that peace and prosperity, as it were. So you can't just start, you can start teaching, but it's not much good if you yourself haven't got there or got something in it. It's not talking about erudition, scholarship. It's talking about, actually, in this context, the more you unfold yourself, the more that self will speak. So it's not you offering, you as in body, mind, intellect, you individually. It's more you unfold the self, the more that will be seen and will speak volumes itself. So it's to the extent you unfold yourself. So one's job is to just gather knowledge, sit with it, reflect it, become it, and let others take. No river is ever left. People will come and take water from the river, but it just collects water. It doesn't go advertising, come and get me the water to drink. It just is taken. So our job is just to keep filling ourselves with that knowledge, cultivating it, let it become that wisdom. And the self will express itself in different ways. You get classical, or in Indian classical, there's certain singers who are said to be realized in certain traditions across the world. There'll be people who are said to be of a certain status. It speaks. Tyagaraja, Madan Mani. It speaks across the world. You have certain people who come up from time to time. Music, pass it on the knowledge in spoken, could be in a certain expression or not. Each have their own way. Not in science. So the self raise it, so it's the self itself speaks. So that's what you've got to do, unfold yourself. Pass it on. Don't keep it to yourself. Let's read it.
In the previous verse, Krishna declared imparting spiritual knowledge to the ignorance-bound world to be the greatest form of bhakti, devotion. In this verse, he declares that itself to be the greatest karma action, service. Service meted out to the world falls under different categories. As parting with material gift, physical service rates higher than that. Still higher is helping others with emotional solace or intellectual study. And the highest form of service is imparting spiritual knowledge.
So this what is described is describing the verse in chapter 4 of Yajna. Different types giving, I think it's verse 28, 29, chapter 4. The gradations of giving. So material, physical, emotional, intellectual, swadhyaya, yajna, the most refined. But you've got to unfold yourself to be able to do that. So that's the self. Raises the self. Part of your sadhana is to actually offer. In your karma, you offer to your next door neighbor, your community, your society, your country, your nation, your universe, to all creatures. You expand it. And to the extent that you have that mental attitude to put back with the understanding that you are the taker, you evolve yourself. The focus is always on the higher, focused on the self, to get to that ultimate status of self-realization. So in that you offer. And in that he's saying offering spiritual knowledge is the highest service. But you've got to evolve yourself in order for that to happen naturally. Otherwise you're giving, it's like bookish knowledge. It doesn't make any sense. It can make sense, but it's of no use. It's like you can go for an exam and regurgitate it, but it's actually not really from within you. Surface. It's not real education. The more you evolve yourself, the more you will naturally offer, spill over. But there's a difference, as he pointed out in verse 67. You don't offer to people who can't take it. Knowledge is not given, it's taken. So you don't need to go into the arenas where people cannot digest it. You go where people want it. In actual fact, we often say a guru appears. You don't seek out the guru, a guru appears to you when you need it. So better hurry up and put in your efforts to get the guru. Don't wait. Don't think there's other things more important. Find out your guru and go with it. Don't wait. Don't waste your time on all the peripheries of life. Get onto it. Don't waste your opportunity. Get onto it. So to be able to hear it and take that on board, you've got to get onto your own self-study, morning self-study and reflection. Okay. Anybody have any question before we move to the next? Hmm. 70.
अद्येष्यते च य इमं धर्म्यां संवादमव्ययो ज्ञानयज्ञेन तेनाहम् इष्टस्याम् इति मे मतिः.
Guru, if you could read the verse.
Verse 70. And he who shall study this sacred dialogue of ours, by him I am worshipped by jnana, yajna, sacrifice of wisdom. Such is my view. Should I go on, Parallel?
So, here, that person, when he says Bhagavad Gita as such, that does yajna. The yajna is, so a person who worships the self. So by pursuing your knowledge of this, of like this, you're worshipping the self, the actual study of it. You're getting into that, worshipping the truth. So you have a clear conviction. You're going to study and reflect. That's your reason for your existence. That jnanam is that yajna, that sacrifice. Sacrifice actually is only sacrificial. You see, when we're in the world of things and beings, it feels like a sacrifice. When you've got onto it, it's no sacrifice. It actually feels more of a sacrifice to go and do the other things. You leave behind your study. You know, somebody tells you to go and do something mundane. It's like a big sacrifice that you leave behind your study and reflection. Actually, you never sacrifice your study and reflection for anybody. Everybody, the whole world can do whatever it wants. I'm not leaving my study, reflection, my evolution. So as you begin to study this knowledge, it almost is like automatic as you begin to reflect on the knowledge, make it your own a little bit. It's almost automatic. You will start imparting by who you are, or maybe by your speech. Your job is to keep, part of it is to keep quiet, that tapas, where it's not to be given. And that's a very tricky thing, where it's not to be given. Keep quiet. That's difficult. You've got to practice that through your own study, reflection, when to speak, when to shut up. Let's read it.
Krishna continues to highlight the greatness of imparting the sacred sermon. He declared that to be the greatest devotion, bhakti, and noblest service, karma. In this verse, the Lord declares the same to be the best form of gaining spiritual knowledge, jnana, as well. Yajna is worship of fire god, a ritual wherein the practitioner makes his offering into fire invoked for the purpose. It signifies destruction of ignorance and attainment of spiritual knowledge. Conducting jnana yajna therefore symbolizes imparting spiritual knowledge through scriptural study and wisdom, jnana. Thus, in 3 verses 68, 69, and 70, Krishna declares his conviction that learning and preaching the great sermon of the Gita would be the best way of practicing the 3 main spiritual disciplines of bhakti, karma, and jnana, the way to reach his supreme abode.
No distractions, no focusing on all the nonsense. Get into that study, reflection. You see, I keep mentioning this in the academy, there's a lot of discussion. You have your study, you have your karma, there's discussion, there's a class, questioning. And sometimes in these discussion groups, there's absolutely nonsense. You know, rubbish is talked. Rubbish meaning it's so on the text and so forth, but it's, you know, we're talking blindly, and as you evolve, you talk more sense as it goes on. But you've got to start somewhere. So when you're new, you might be talking a whole lot of rubbish. Everybody can see you're talking a whole lot of rubbish. But as you grow, you will become more simmered and thoughtful in your approach, like anything. But with that consistency of purpose, of sticking with that knowledge, reflecting, thinking, discussing, you grow into it, you become that you offer that as your yajna. That becomes life, the purpose, the understanding of that's life's purpose. All the rest of it falls apart. This really is not so significant when you're seeking the self. That's a yajna. So all the other yajnas, yajna at material level, physical level, emotional level, intellectual level for knowledge, all of them, when it's focused on the self, supports getting to the self. So in our worldly sense, we need all of those yajnas to just pitch up on the self so we can get out of the mundane. So when you're focused on swadhyaya yajna, you naturally also impart it to in whichever way you're at. Let's stop here. Any questions before we go?
Or this is a question probably in general. I know Bhagavad Gita is one of those scriptures which have been interpreted by lots of people, a lot of philosophers. I know jnana, I think, is very important, but is there a possibility that this whole jnana can be convoluted because of various interpretations that can really happen on many of these so-called, shlokas? Because while we read them with a specific meaning, but the interpretations can be different depending on, I think, the person, the phase of life they have been in, and the kind of experiences they would have had.
Sure. But the thing about it is You yourself have to have, one of the things is if you yourself give yourself time to study, reflect, and know the import of their shlokas, then you put yourself in a position not to misinterpret. You see, it's developing your thinking capacity. Somebody else may have made a mistake, but you, from your own study, reflection, and having a guide who can actually, it's authentic. You have to even question that guide. Is this right? Only from your own questioning, shravana, manana, are you going to get it out of you. Yeah. So irrespective of what may be written authentically or rubbish, you yourself have to get it out of yourself. So there are many interpretations which some don't make sense. So unfortunately, that's the way of the world. So you have to put yourself in a position to select well. We'll come back to that. Understand what you're saying.
What does shloka mean here? How you use it?
Sorry, shloka is the verse. The verse. Shlok means the chant, the verse. I mean the just the verse.
Answer.
Stanza.
So Guru is saying one verse might contain the whole of the Gita. Is that what he's saying?
No, I think Guru was just saying, how do you know what's authentic? Essentially, one person translating from one perspective, they may have had a life of such and such. It might not be accurate, but you just translating the Sanskrit. When you translate the Sanskrit, whatever your life is your business. You translate the Sanskrit, then you have to think on it. If you have somebody who you can trust in, who's got that authenticity, that knowledge, that wisdom, who's realized maybe, then you go with that. But you've got to put in the effort to do your own questioning. Tapas. Shravana. Shravana means taking that knowledge. Manana, reflection. You've got to be ready to put in that reflection, and you get the right guru. You get what you deserve, but you've got to put in the work. I am to next week is Christmas, so I think most of us will be preoccupied in some way or another, and so you have in your mind, do your study in the morning and your reflection for your without the class. Make sure you get onto that, and we'll resume back. We'll actually let you know what day we resume back, because I didn't look at the calendar to what day. But then, okay, Hari Om.
Thank you.